When you think of history's greatest betrayer, there's one name that probably pops into your head almost immediately: Judas Iscariot. The story is it's everywhere in our culture. He's the follower who sold out his leader for a bag of silver, a classic tale of greed and treachery. And of course, the scene that everyone pictures is the Last Supper. I mean, this is the moment it all goes down, right? Where the betrayal is revealed, cementing Judas's role as the ultimate villain in a story we've been telling for 2,000 years. Okay, but what if that whole story is wrong? The source material we're digging into today, well, it asks us to pretty much throw out everything we think we know. It puts forward this radical theory that Judas wasn't just some flawed follower. He was a deep-cover operative on a mission from the very beginning. So let's just dive right into the core claim of this text. It's arguing that Judas joining the disciples wasn't a matter of faith at all. Nope, it was a calculated political infiltration. And this source, it really doesn't pull any punches. It completely recasts Judas as a government agent working for the Sanhedrin, the ruling council. And his goal was singular and sinister: make sure Jesus and his entire movement were wiped out. So what kind of guy are we talking about here? What was his profile? Well, the text claims he was a zealot, a political revolutionary who wanted a real, physical, earthly kingdom, not some spiritual one. His job, apparently, was to question the other disciples, look for weak spots, and constantly push Jesus to show off a more worldly kind of power. And here's where things get really interesting, and maybe a little anachronistic. The source rethinks Judas's role as the group's treasurer. It wasn't just about holding the money bag. The text makes this modern comparison, saying his role was more like an IRS or FBI agent. His job was to keep an eye on the group's money for the authorities. Now, when you see Judas through this spy framework, that infamous deal he made with the chief priests looks totally different. It stops being about personal greed, and it becomes the final step of his mission. The price, as the source points out, was 30 pieces of silver. And when you realize that's only about $120 today, it really makes you think, right? The motive was probably never about the cash to begin with. So according to this text, when Jesus said at the Last Supper, "One of you will betray me," it wasn't just some vague feeling he had. He understood the political game being played. He knew exactly who the mole was in his own inner circle. And all of this, it comes to a head. The spy's mission reaches its climax in the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane, which actually means oil press, was a spot where Jesus and his disciples went all the time. It was supposed to be a place for prayer, for quiet, but on this night, it was about to become the stage for a carefully planned operation. The way this text describes it, the arrest wasn't just a chaotic mob scene, it was a precise tactical maneuver. Judas wasn't just randomly pointing a finger, he was the insider. He was the only one who could lead the soldiers to a private spot in the middle of the night and give them a positive ID on their target. And that kiss? It wasn't just an act of betrayal, it was the prearranged signal for the Roman soldiers who, the source says, had no idea what Jesus actually looked like. So we're back to that huge question: why? I mean, if it wasn't for a tiny bit of money, what was really driving Judas? And this is where we get to the absolute heart of the source material's argument. It completely swaps out that simple, traditional motive of greed and replaces it with something way more complicated: a political agenda. According to this text, Judas was being pulled in a few different directions. On one hand, he had to ditty to his handlers. On the other, he had his own zealot ideology. He was getting frustrated with Jesus' spiritual focus and his advice to just, pay taxes to Caesar. He wanted a warrior king, a messiah who would use force to kick Rome out. And the betrayal was his last-ditch effort to force Jesus' hand and maybe, just maybe, start that revolution. But here's the thing, this reimagined history, it doesn't stop with Judas's motive. It uses this whole political framework to challenge the actual outcome of the betrayal, the crucifixion itself. We all know how the story is supposed to go, right? The betrayal was part of the plan, it was prophesied, it was a necessary step on the road to the crucifixion, just like this famous verse from Matthew suggests. But then, the source drops its biggest bombshell. It pulls a verse from the Quran to argue that the crucifixion was basically an illusion, that the authorities, for all their planning, never actually killed Jesus. So here's the crucial point. This text claims that an impostor was put on the cross in Jesus' place. A crucifixion definitely happened, but the man who died up there was someone else, and the whole event was just made to look that way to everyone watching. Okay, so that just opens up a huge can of worms, doesn't it? If the goal wasn't just to shut up a blasphemer, and if they didn't even crucify the right guy, what was the real threat? What were the Roman and religious authorities so scared of? Well, the source ties it all together by saying this was never just about politics, it was a spiritual war. The threat Jesus posed wasn't just to the local government, it was to the entire belief system of the Roman Empire. They were acting to get rid of a rival's spiritual power that they thought threatened their whole lineup of gods, Zeus, Hercules, all of them. And so this whole explainer of the source text leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. For 2,000 years, one version of this story has been told. Over and over, this text gives us a completely different one. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do these historical stories get built, and who gets to decide which version becomes the truth?